Deb Fewster speaking, and I'll ask all of my colleagues from Justice Connect, so Sally and Lauren from NTV and Jess from Safe and Equal, to also switch their cameras back on right now for our Q&A session. So just a reminder to use that Zoom box to submit your question. It's great to see some questions that have been coming in throughout the presentations this morning. And Sam, I might just get you to stop sharing your screen as well, please. Thanks for your great presentation of that excellent tool, Sam. So I might just start with maybe a question for Justice Connect for Sally, but you know, colleagues, feel free to jump in with your reflections as well. So the first question that I've got is from a worker who says they're supporting a victim survivor whose former partner has recently exited prison for matters unrelated to family violence. He's moved himself back into the home. She doesn't want him there, but she's too scared to ask him to leave. His name is not on the rental agreement, and the worker has two questions. The first being, if the property manager finds out, is this grounds for the whole family to be evicted? And secondly, if so, are there any legal rights that the victim survivor can exercise to try and safely hold on to their home?
Thanks, Deb. I think it's probably a question that isn't necessarily covered by the RTA. In that instance, our advice would generally be get advice about an intervention order, because it's probably going to be more about someone being excluded from the home than it is under the RTA, because the RTA is providing for you to make changes under the rental agreement. In this case, the rental agreement's not really a factor. It's just that they're there without you wanting them to be. So I think it's probably, legal advice about intervention orders. Oh, sorry, there was a second part to that I forgot. In terms of putting the renter at risk in that situation, look, there's potential that for a couple of things to go wrong. I guess any of those kind of behaviourally based issues, if there's causing any trouble, breaches to the tenancy, things like that, or potentially a rental provider could serve a notice to vacate on the basis that you were illegally subletting. Although it sounds like that probably wouldn't necessarily get through, but there are risks there. And obviously if that happened, we'd recommend contacting tenancy legal advice as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for that, Sally. And if I'm just looking across at screens, we've got a few screens here where we're looking at questions coming in from the audience. So this next question is for Sally as well, and it might be a clarification of something that you already touched on. But if a client has an IVO but has to exit crisis accommodation while waiting for priority housing, can they break their private rental lease due to escaping family violence when they get a housing offer in order to enter the DFFH priority housing property?
So they can't use the family violence provisions, because those, for a lease to be ended, those require both parties to be on the lease. However, under section, I want to say 91ZB, there is, it's provided for someone to be able to give a reduced notice period to terminate a lease on the basis that they've been given an offer of public housing. So they could use that instead.
Thank you for that. Next question is one for Jess. So it's about non-legal supports, and it's very kind of specific question. So Jess, if we need to take that on notice, that's okay as well. We'll follow up. So the question is, how much is the Orange Door brokerage and also the Red Cross brokerage? And we will put a link in the chat, some information about how to apply for brokerage and information about the Personal Safety Initiative. But how much is the Orange Door brokerage and the Red Cross brokerage?
So my understanding, oh gosh, this is testing my memory, but actually I might just quickly have a look just so I can tell you. But so my understanding is the Orange Door brokerage is, I'd contact them, but my understanding it's probably around 1,500. And sorry, what was the other brokerage?
The Red Cross brokerage.
I don't have information on that amount, but I would be contacting them, and maybe I can just send you some information about that, Deb. Look into it.
Thank you so much, and we'll share that with everyone who's registered to attend the event. Another one back to Sally. Sally, you mentioned you were talking about breaking a first fixed term lease. So one of your slides talked about the fact that a renter who's experienced family violence or personal violence, we know the scope of today's presentation is around family violence, but a renter who's experienced family violence or personal violence can break a lease with reduced costs or no costs. And just thinking about the distinction between, I guess, what's the threshold for like reduced costs versus no cost? Is there a different kind of evidentiary requirement? Is there a different kind of contextual things? How is this kind of like negotiated or landed in terms of reduced costs or no costs? Do you have any insights about that?
Not particularly. I think it's really just going to depend on the circumstances, and it's probably a matter for VCAT. Generally, we would advocate really strongly for someone who is breaking a lease to not have to pay any costs at all. Under the specific family violence provisions, it does say that if someone is breaking a lease for the purposes of that section, that no compensation is available for the actual, like, a rental provider can't be compensated for the early termination of the lease. So there might still be some costs associated with, outstanding rent or bond, things like that. But it's really about that compensation piece for ending the lease early. That's unavailable. But other than that, it's really just going to depend on what the costs are and what the circumstances are.
Yeah, thank you so much. The next one is a question for Lauren. What do the exit plans look like for men who are leaving accommodation after 30 days? I know you did talk about this, trajectory into homelessness. Can you talk about the exit planning that's done, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So exit planning commences in session 1, and all men are also linked in with the St Kilda Crisis Centre worker who they meet with weekly also. All options are discussed with the man right from the first session. Obviously, affordability, location are constant barriers to what those exit plans look like. I don't have the exact statistics on me, but a large majority of men plan to return to the family home at the end of their stay in the MAX program. So exit planning around that also takes place with our affected family member, whether or not that is an option, whether or not that's a safe option, what supports need to be put in place for the affected family member also. All men exiting the MAX program exit with referrals to homelessness programs, housing programs, but also across the sector as well, drugs and alcohol, mental health. So they leave with a suite of referrals.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And another question for Lauren, but also, welcome comments from Safe and Equal and Justice Connect as well. But the question is, do you have any guidance on how we can engage men in support in a safe and effective way, which does not escalate risk or place staff in unsafe situations?
Yeah, a really good question. And I think supporting your staff with the right training is essential so that your staff know how to work with men using violence. It's a very specialised skill set. So, lots of different providers, No to Violence, Safe and Equal, lots of different providers provide training opportunities. No to Violence offer one that is free. Anyone can sign up to do the 5 essentials for working with men, which may help your staff. But it's providing your staff with that training and that background, and giving them the skill set that they need to be able to work with men, or refer the men to someone that can work with them.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not sure if, Jess, you wanted to add anything from Safe and Equal's perspective?
Yeah, sure. I might just add, I suppose there's so many more resources around understanding kind of your role and responsibilities around working with adults using violence under MARAM. So I would review the MARAM practice guides. There's also lots of trainers Lauren mentioned. I know the training for those with identification responsibilities is also currently being offered. So I'd be really to do some work around really what your role and responsibility is, because often it's not necessarily to engage someone directly around their use of violence. And
Thank you.
sorry, I did just look at what the Australian Red Cross offers for the assistance for people on temporary visas, and it's up to payments of 5,000.
Thanks so much for multitasking while simultaneously being on a panel, Jess. Thank you for that information. This is a question for Sam, but and it's around the home of your own online tool. But I might just kind of flag to Sally, there might be some other comments that you want to make about this particular kind of cohort of victim survivors. So this is a question around victim survivors who are on temporary visas. So Sam, what the question is and the context is the person's commented, as we know, there are compounding barriers that victim survivors who are on temporary visas experience regarding accessing long-term sustainable housing. And some of those systemic barriers include not being able to access social security, not being able to access specific brokerage initiatives. And the question is does the Home of Your Own online tool provide guidance for these communities?
Yeah, great question. My answer is probably that's maybe slightly outside the scope of Home of Your Own, because I guess it's my understanding that the rental provisions apply to anyone regardless of their visa status. And when it comes to the social security and brokerage available, we have definitely specified which one someone can specifically reach out to if they are on temporary visa status, including the Red Cross one that Jess mentioned. But yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd add to that, Sally.
No, I think just that we acknowledge that that's incredibly difficult for people in that situation. And if we're assisting with a legal matter, we can provide advice about, how their visa status might affect their legal matter. But yeah, it's generally outside the scope of our sort of general practice.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks for that, Sam. Another question for Sally. If a victim survivor flees a property, but the perpetrator remains, can the victim survivor get a share of the bond back?
So there's a couple of different ways to approach that. One is if the parties both agree that that's what they want, that the person using violence stays and the other person leaves, they may be able to work with the real estate to facilitate a transfer of the lease, including repayment of the bond. Obviously, that's ideal, but doesn't always work out for everyone. So in that case, you would probably apply to VCAT anyway, because you'd want to terminate the rental agreement. If you didn't terminate the rental agreement, you'd have that ongoing liability for rent and possible damage. So as part of that application, you could then apply to have your portion of the bond returned.
Thank you so much. Next question is for anyone who wants to contribute. Sally, you might kind of perhaps kick us off. It is a question that is not about the current kind of reforms, but kind of, I guess, looking at some of the issues that we've had with the current kind of legislative and regulatory regime, where, there's kind of like, we're seeing kind of like gaps in renters' rights. We're seeing, renters finding it hard to kind of assert their rights and affect kind of timely remedy as well. So this is a question or a bit of a comment about the Victorian government's commitment to, through the housing statement, to establish a new rental dispute body that's aimed at alleviating the current pressure on VCAT and streamlining these processes for the public. And I guess it's like inviting opinions here, really. Colleagues, it's the question is, like, from your perspective, what are some key areas that will need to be considered to ensure this new body provides better outcomes for victim survivors? So not sure if you've got some views or opinions on that area of reform. Any comments on that?
I will say it's a big question. It's something that obviously as a tenancy legal service we're looking at and discussing with our sector allies. As always, we really recommend consultation with tenancy advocates, lawyers, people who use VCAT and their supports and advocates. And when it comes to renters experiencing family violence, experts and people with lived experience in that area as well. They're complex questions, and I think we realise that having that kind of access can sometimes be really beneficial for some people to get their matters dealt with more quickly and easily, but there are also drawbacks to be considered, and we're really interested in how it's worked in other jurisdictions, and you know what best practice is moving forward. We'll remain engaged with that process as it moves forward.
Thanks, Sally. I'm not sure if anyone else has got any comments, but obviously it's something that's top of mind for VCOSS in terms of our thinking and our advocacy as well. This next question, I guess, speaks to kind of current rights under the RTA, and then the difficulties sometimes renters feel in terms of asserting those rights, even when they know their rights, because we know that there are unequal kind of power relations in the market, and they're particularly like exacerbated when we're in a really overheated private rental market like we are right now. So Sally, this is a bit of kind of contextual information as well, but essentially it kind of refers to one of the slides on your presentation. You mentioned that the RTA allows victim survivors to object to advertising photos or videos. So the scenario here is that someone is supporting a client who's coming up to the end of a fixed term lease. They've been issued with a notice to vacate as the property owner is selling. And she felt pressured to let a professional photographer come in to take advertising photos because she needs to find another rental, wants to maintain a good relationship with the real estate firm. She thought that she would have a right to review the photos, but the property manager didn't answer her calls. Now the photos are online. She's not comfortable with them. What are her rights, and what do you suggest she does if the property manager won't engage?
It's quite specific, so I won't go into too much detail because it's getting probably pretty close to legal advice. But I would definitely suggest jumping on to Home of Your Own. We cover this scenario with quite detailed information about what the rights are and what the process is for objecting to advertising. So that's a really good place to start. If you don't get it, if you feel like there are still unanswered questions at that point, then it would strongly suggest getting some legal advice that's specifically tailored to that person's scenario and sort of the stage where they're at of that process.
I might just add to that as well. Obviously, yeah, where a rental provider is not engaging or being obstructive, this might not be entirely useful, but Home of Your Own can also generate a letter to the rental provider as a request that, basically someone can prevent photos or videos being listed without their approval, and that they can only organise inspections by appointment rather than open inspections. So if you're supporting someone to advocate for those rights, there's also a letter that can be generated and sent to the rental provider.
Fantastic. Now, I might just do a shout out just to say final opportunity for any last questions as well. Looks like we've probably exhausted the list at this stage. There is a question which talks to, I guess, initiatives and programs that are working well to support housing stability. I guess I'll ask this question, but just kind of recognising we have touched on some great kind of initiatives in the presentations, but an opportunity for perhaps Safe and Equal and for No to Violence to kind of give another shout out to things that you think are kind of working well and that you really want community sector workers to be aware of programs that exist, these resources in the sector. So the question is, the comment is that, as we know, a lack of access to sustainable housing for people who use violence can exacerbate risk and lead to poor outcomes. Are there any particular initiatives or programs that you think are working well to support housing stability for people who use violence, who are at risk or are facing homelessness? So, Lauren, you've talked about the MAX program, for example, and talked about the pressure that's under. So I think that's an example of something that's working well. I'm not sure if there's anything else that you want to kind of draw our attention to in the men's space. And similarly, Jess, I'm not sure if there's anything in particular that you really want to kind of shout out from a Safe and Equal perspective. So I might just kind of invite those kind of reflections ahead of kind of wrapping up as well. Anything that you'd like to add?
Nothing that I guess I'd like to add, other than, we have spoken in detail around the MAX program, and I believe after this presentation, the referral form will be shared with this group. So how to refer in will be shared. There's similar programs to the MAX program that operate in similar, if not same sort of ways. There's one in Ballarat, I understand. There's a more medium-term program that offers up to 6 months housing in some LGAs. So there are other opportunities out there as well. I think that this is a space that is still relatively young, and I think over the next 12 months we'll see, these housing options for keeping women at home and children at home and people using violence out of the home will continue to mature, and there'll be more offerings around as well.
Thanks for those reflections, Lauren. Really appreciate that. Jess, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I think that, everyone's aware of kind of the housing affordability is a constant issue. It's constantly something Safe and Equal is raising, and I don't think that's been sufficiently addressed kind of at a policy level. But definitely, I think some of the brokerage, their ability to respond quickly, and to support those in crisis situations, I think that is, with the introduction to them, that's been a huge change in, I suppose, the sector's ability to support victim survivors.
Thank you, Jess. And we've just had a couple more kind of questions just come through before we start to wrap up. This is a de-identified scenario. So in a scenario where a mother and a young person, so a young person kind of age 16 to 22, flee a home because of family violence and are waiting for public housing or other options, can the young person access brokerage to get them into shared housing whilst the mother gets housing for herself?
Yes. So I suppose a lot of the brokerage see individual, people as individuals or a family unit. So it just depends whether they're applying as a family unit or separately.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jess. And a question for Sally is, property managers are denying applications to install CCTV. What can we do?
So I need to check the actual specific provision. We don't do a lot of modifications work, so I don't have it off the top of my head. But firstly, we definitely recommend getting advice. Tenants Vic is usually a really good contact for these kind of questions. But if it's one that does require consent, and I think the difference, Sam may know this better than I do, I can't remember, whether they're hardwired or not is often the issue. If they are hardwired, I believe, don't quote me on this, that consent is required, and if consent is refused and you consider that unreasonable, you can apply to VCAT for them to make an order to say that the refusal of consent is unreasonable and that their consent then isn't required.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. I've got one last question that's come through. I'm not sure whether this is a question that our kind of subject matter experts on the panel feel comfortable engaging with, or whether it's perhaps, a question for colleagues in other parts of our sector. But I might ask the question, that I might kind of contextualize it with some kind of insights that I'm kind of hearing about, like rent tech platforms as well. So the question is, which I'm not sure you'll be able to kind of engage with, is, do you have any tips on securing a rental property for a woman who has recently fled in the situation where she is the sole renter and her only income is Centrelink benefits? So I'm not sure, Jess, if you wanted to kind of like reinforce some messages around like the different kind of financial and other supports available to victim survivors.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Yeah, look, that's a really difficult situation, because I think if we look at the percentage of rental properties that are affordable for people on Centrelink benefits, it's very, very small. So I suppose my advice would just be to link in with a specialist service to access, the full amount of brokerage. But yeah, I think finding long-term sustainable affordable properties is a real challenge.
Yeah, no, we know it's something that kind of exercises the minds of all of us working in the sector on a an hourly basis. It is quite dire, the shortage of affordable rental properties. And just on that, I guess something that I might just like remark on, and Sally, I'm not sure if you and others want to like comment on this, but I was in a meeting with VCOSS, group of VCOSS members yesterday, and they were reflecting on that very point. It's very hard to kind of be able to be competitive in this market if you're single income household. It's challenging for some double income households as well. And there's some kind of comments and reflections on how single mothers are faring in this market. Single mothers who are fleeing family violence as well. And they were kind of reflecting on this issue is kind of even more exacerbated by this increasing use of these rent tech platforms to collect data that really is kind of like scooping up a lot of intel that's not really like shouldn't really be collected or not really essential to be collected. And then algorithms kind of like weeding out certain cohorts of renters. I guess, Sally, under the RTA reforms, we have seen some restrictions on the use of tenancy databases, or what workers in the sector sometimes refer to as, tenancy blacklists as well. But these rent tech platforms seem to be kind of like circumventing like the rules. I'm not sure whether you're kind of coming up against any cases of this or any complexity with this in your practice at Justice Connect.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, I think we are. In my experience, there are fewer people on a tenancy database than people often think they're on a tenancy database and aren't necessarily. It's really hard to know sometimes what the issues are. As you said, the rental market is incredibly competitive, and so sometimes people are just not getting properties because they're being beat out by people who have, who look better on paper, and it's really difficult out there. And we do acknowledge that, renters are expected a lot of times to jump through hoops to prove themselves. And it's really hard to push back and assert your rights when you want to be an attractive renter. Unfortunately, I don't have solutions. We're just seeing it's harder and harder for all people to obtain rental properties at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And just one final question about ways of working with Justice Connect for community sector workers. There's a question for Sally and Sam. Do Justice Connect do secondary consultations? If so, how do we go about setting them up?
I think I just answered that privately, but for so we're not funded to be an advice service or a sec consult. We have a pretty small internal team and work with a big network of pro bono lawyers. But if we can help, we will. If it falls into a specific area that we have expertise, so renting and family violence is one of those, then we'll always try and help if we've got capacity. So we'd recommend just emailing us at homelesslaw@justiceconnect.org.au and let us know what the issue is and what information you're looking for, and we'll help if we can.
Thanks so much. So that brings us to the end of the Q&A and the kind of tail end of our event. So very big thank you to all our presenters who've shared their expertise and their time with us today. So thank you to Jess from Safe and Equal, Lauren from No to Violence, Sally and Sam from Justice Connect. Really want to also thank Department of Government Services and the Victorian Property Fund. Our Renters' Rights Rundown events are made possible with their support. Want to thank all of the people who've joined the audience today and all of our stakeholders whose insights continue to shape our work on rental fairness. And I'd like to thank the VCOSS team, Deb Pearce, Miriam Sped, Melissa Hale and Ella Longhurst, our new Housing and Justice Policy Advisor, who you'll all get to know over coming weeks and months. And we will have a full transcript and caption video recording of this event in a few days. We'll send you a link to the VCOSS Renters' Rights webpage where you'll find everything related to information about renters' rights, support for renters, all our Renters' Rights Rundown events, resources. And we do also plan to develop a short insights paper on renting and family violence, working with colleagues at Justice Connect as well and others in the sector. So stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to contribute insights or de-identified case studies or know more about that work that we'll be developing up, please get in touch with Ella Longhurst, our new Housing and Justice Policy Advisor. I might get one of my VCOSS colleagues to put Ella's email address in the chat for you. And please follow us on social media, sign up to email alerts to learn about future events like this one. We'll continue to hold these regularly. And thanks again for joining us today. I hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.